buh, buh. The gorilla's fur was very black against the green leaves, and she had large nostrils and small ears. Her bright brown eyes were full of mischief. Buh, 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 she said, buh, buh. Buh, buh yourself, said Annie. The gorilla hid behind the leaves again, and then she poked her head out. Peekaboo, said Annie, and the girl clapped her hands together. She stuck out her tongue. Jack and Annie both laughed. Bub, 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 the gorilla said, and then she bounded away through the misty forest. Hey, Bubba, don't leave us, Annie called. Jack rolled his eyes. Don't blame her, Bubba, he said to Annie. Or don't name her, Bubba, said Annie. You don't have to. Wait, Bubba, Annie shouted. She took off after the small gorilla. Turn every animal into your best friend, Jack finished. He shook his head, then he made a list in his notebook. Gorilla behavior. Plays peekaboo, claps hands, sticks out tongue. As he wrote, Jack heard Annie laughing, but then he heard high shrieks. He caught his breath. A leopard? He wondered. Carrying his notebook, Jack hurried in the direction of the noise, and he found Annie and the small gorilla perched in 2 trees. What's wrong? Said Jack, standing beneath the trees. Nothing, called Annie. We're just playing. The small gorilla screeched again. Then she screeched her head and hiccuped. Annie screeched too, and she screeched her head and hiccuped, or scratched her head and hiccuped. While they played, Jack studied the gorilla a bit more, and he noticed that she was about the size of a 3-year-old kid. Her fingers looked like human fingers, and they had fingernails. He made a new list. Young gorilla, size of a 3-year-old, fingers like humans, fingernails. Jack heard the tree leaves shaking, and he looked up. Annie and the gorilla had both climbed higher. Hey, come down here, Annie, Jack called. You might fall. Plus, it's getting dark. Jack looked around, and lights were fading quickly from the forest. Is night falling? He wondered. Or is a storm coming? The small gorilla screeched again and climbed even higher. Hey, Bubba, where you going? Said Annie. She climbed even higher, too. That's enough, Annie. Come down now, said Jack. I'm serious. To his relief, the gorilla settled on a branch. Annie did the same, and the gorillas broke off a piece of tree bark. She nibbled it like a candy bar. Annie broke off a piece of bark, and she nibbled it like a candy bar, too. The gorilla threw down her bark, and she grabbed a tree branch and swung to another tree. Don't try it, Annie, shouted Jack. But his warning came too late. Annie threw down her bark. She grabbed a tree branch and started to swing to another tree. Annie didn't swing like a gorilla. She fell from the tree and crashed down to the ground near Jack. Annie! He cried. Chapter 4. Jack knelt beside Annie, and she was gasping for breath. The gorilla bounded down the tree and over to Annie. She bit her lower lip, and as she was worried, Are you okay? Jack answered. Yes, Annie panted. Just got the breath knocked out of me. Wiggle your arms and your legs, said Jack. Annie wiggled her arms and her legs. Good, nothing's broken, said Jack. Just then, he felt a drop of rain hit his arm. The mist had turned into rain. Uh-oh, said Jack. And he threw his notebook back in his pack. I better get our umbrella and flashlight, he said. I left them near the tree that looked like a chair. I'll come too, said Annie, and she started to sit up. No, catch your breath, said Jack. It's not fair. I'll be right back. He took off his jacket and draped it over her. This'll help you stay dry, he said. And he pulled on his pack and stood up. The gorilla screeched. Stay with Annie, said Jack. Then he dashed back through the cloud forest. He looked for the fat tree with the wide limbs with moss, and he peered through the growing darkness. Jack saw many fat trees. He saw many limbs padded with moss. Soon he could barely see any trees at all. He realized that a storm and night had come to the forest. Forget the umbrella and flashlight, he thought. It was more important to get back to Annie before it was too dark. They could wait together for daylight. As Jack started back to Annie, he could hardly see. He didn't know which way to go. Annie, Bubba, he shouted. He felt silly shouting Bubba. But he didn't know what else to call the small gorilla. Jack put out his hands, and he moved slowly through the dark, rainy forest. He kept calling for Annie and Bubba. He listened for them, but he couldn't hear anything above the loud patters of rain. "Ah!" he shouted. He had run into something that felt like a big ball of spider webs. As he jumped back, he slipped and fell in the mud, and he crawled over a tree and huddled between two of the giant roots. "I'll just wait here until morning," he thought. "Then I'll find Annie, or she'll find me." As rain dripped all around him, Jack wondered if leopards came out at night. He quickly pushed the thought away, and he tried to think about morning and finding Annie and going home. He was ready to go home. Why did Morgan even send us to the cloud forest, he wondered. He tried to remember the secret rhyme. "To find a special magic," he whispered. He couldn't remember the rest, and he felt tired and miserable. He took his backpack off and rested his head, and he closed his eyes. "To find a special magic," he mumbled. But he couldn't find the magic. He couldn't even find the words that finished the rhyme. Worst of all, he couldn't find Annie. Their fun adventure in the cloud forest had turned into a nightmare.